Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio channel. Tonight we step into a world that many people think they understand, but almost never feel closely enough. What does it mean to open your eyes in 1720 and discover that the law has already chosen your place, your labour, and your limits? What does morning feel like when your life is measured in ownership, and even your name can be handled like a tool? You enter a colonial landscape of damp earth, wood smoke, salt air, and hard commands, where survival depends on reading footsteps, voices, and moods before the sun has fully risen. The picture is not the polished one from grand old houses and museum signs. It is rougher, colder, and far more intimate. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, comment below with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights and let yourself drift into the uneasy hush of a colonial morning where you wake not to possibility, but to a day that has already been decided for you. You wake in darkness that is never completely silent. Someone nearby shifts against rough boards. A baby lets out a thin cry, then settles again. You hear breathing, a cough, the whisper of straw, the small restless movements of bodies that never quite sleep deeply. The air smells of smoke sunk into wood, damp fabric, old ash, and human closeness. It is the smell of too many lives pressed into too little space. Your skin feels the chill first. Morning in 1720 arrives through cracks in the wall before it arrives in the sky. The cold touches your hands, your neck, your bare feet if you move too quickly from your place. You do not rise because you are refreshed. You rise because the rhythm of the place demands it. Dawn is not a gentle invitation. It is an order that reaches you even before a voice does. The building around you might be called a cabin, though the word sounds almost cheerful by modern standards. In truth, it is usually a cramped wooden structure or a rough clay and timber dwelling, depending on the colony, the wealth of the enslaver, and the kind of labour expected nearby. The floor may be packed dirt. It may be simple boards worn smooth by years of use. In some places, a small hearth provides warmth. In others, warmth is a rumour that visits only when the fire behaves. Smoke often clings low, especially in colder months, finding your eyes and throat before it slips upward. You're born into a world where comfort is not arranged around you. Efficiency is. Even as a child, even as someone very young, you begin to understand that your waking body is valuable to others in a way your feelings are not. Colonial law in many English mainland colonies has already hardened around that truth. By 1720, slavery is not a vague custom. It is a legal system. In places like Virginia and South Carolina, black status is increasingly fixed, inherited, and enforced through statutes that turn people into property across generations. That is the mainstream fact sitting underneath the morning, like a stone under shallow water. Everything rests on it. So you dress, if dressing is the word. Cloth scratches your skin, linen, wool, coarse homespun fabric, may be patched many times, may be passed down, may be cut to last rather than fit. The texture is always part of the day. It rubs at the neck. It hangs awkwardly at the shoulder. It traps sweat later when the sun climbs. Shoes, if you have them, are practical and precious. Many do not fit well. Some people go barefoot for much of the year, their soles learning the language of cold mud, splinters, gravel, packed paths, and field stubble. Your body knows the ground better than it knows softness. Outside, the world is turning grey. The first light spreads across a yard marked by work. You smell wet soil, manure, stale water, smoke from kitchens or fires being stirred awake, and in coastal areas the faint sharp taste of salt moving in the air. Roosters break the quiet with an almost theatrical confidence. Dogs bark. A door opens. Metal knocks against metal somewhere. You hear a bucket scrape. The place is coming alive, though alive is not always the word you would choose. In 1720, black Americans are not one uniform community, and that matters. Some are African-born, carried across the Atlantic through the violence of the slave trade. Some are born in the colonies. Some speak several languages. Some know bits of English, or are learning it under pressure. Some come from rice-growing regions of West Africa and are forced into rice labour in Carolina because enslavers recognise their expertise and intend to profit from it. Others are pushed into tobacco, indigo, livestock work, carpentry, domestic service, or dock labour. The colonies love variety when it increases profit. Human suffering, apparently, can be customised. As you step into the morning, you learn quickly that sound is information. The tone of an overseer matters. The pace of footsteps matters. The snap of a door opening can tell you whether the day begins in ordinary strain or unusual danger. Children absorb this almost before they can explain it. You sense mood the way a sailor reads wind. One wrong glance, one delay, one misunderstanding can alter the entire shape of the hours ahead. Breakfast, if offered before work, is simple and functional. Cornmeal is common. Mush made from maize appears often in British North America because it is cheap, filling, and easy to prepare in quantity. Sometimes there is a bit of saltfish, or leftovers, or a scrap of pork if the plantation is provisioning labour carefully. Sometimes the meal is thin enough to feel more like an argument than a gift. Hunger is not always dramatic. Often it is steady, dull, familiar, woven into the body until it becomes part of how you judge time. You notice hands all around you, hands tying cloth, hands lifting pots, hands steadying children, hands already cracked from labour, scarred, swollen, calloused. In a place like this, hands tell stories faster than words. A child may still have softness in the fingers. An older woman may move with practiced speed, never wasting motion. A man heading to the fields may flex his wrists once before the day starts, as if negotiating quietly with pain. Nobody needs to say much. The body keeps the record. There are emotional rules here too. Some feelings must be hidden, and hidden early. Fear cannot always be shown. Anger must often be swallowed whole. Grief has to find corners, yet tenderness still exists, stubbornly. You may feel a hand on your shoulder before you step out. You may hear someone murmur a warning, a prayer, or a little joke so dry it barely qualifies as humour. Even in terrible systems, people continue the impolite habit of being human. One quirky detail from colonial life would almost seem absurd if it were not real. In some places, enslavers and colonial officials became so anxious about communication among enslaved people that they watched drums with suspicion, fearing they could carry messages over distance. Historians debate how widespread such restrictions were in the early mainland colonies, but the fear itself tells you something important. Enslavers were not only afraid of labour lost, they were afraid of connection. Imagine being frightened by rhythm. It would be funny if it were not so revealing. The morning labour assignment depends on where you are. On a tobacco plantation in the Chesapeake, the day may pull you toward rows that demand relentless attention. Tobacco is a fussy crop. It needs planting, weeding, topping, worming, cutting, curing, sorting. It behaves like a plant designed by a perfectionist with a cruel streak. On a rice plantation in South Carolina, the work can be wetter, more exhausting, and more dangerous, carried out in swampy lowlands thick with insects and heat later in the year. In towns, some enslaved people serve in kitchens, workshops, stables, or docks, where labour is different, but control remains constant. If you're very young, your tasks may begin with carrying, fetching, watching, cleaning, learning motions that seem small but are really preparation. Childhood exists, but in restricted form. Play survives in fragments. tucked into edges of time, but responsibility arrives early and stays late. A child can be useful long before adulthood, and that usefulness becomes a colonial expectation. There is no sentimental illusion here that youth should be protected for its own sake. Protection, where it appears, comes mostly from family and community, not from the structure of the society around you. The sky lightens further. Mist hangs low over fields or paths. Your breath may show in colder weather. The beauty of the landscape can be almost rude in its indifference. Pine woods glow softly. Marsh water catches pale light. Birds begin their chatter as though no legal code has ever existed. Nature, maddeningly, does not pause to acknowledge injustice. It simply continues being lovely in places where people are not allowed to be free. Very inconsiderate of the sunrise. Really? By now you understand something central. Slavery in 1720 is not only about labour, it is about time. Your waking time, walking time, eating time, speaking time, resting time, time that might otherwise belong to family, thought, skill, worship, memory, or simple idleness is claimed and directed. Even waiting becomes work because you must wait alertly. You must be ready to move when told. Your body does not belong to the morning. The morning belongs to the system, and yet the system is never total in the way it imagines itself to be. Inside it, people carry knowledge, African agricultural skill, healing practices, cooking methods, childcare traditions, naming customs, songs, beliefs, and ways of reading the world do not vanish just because a law says ownership is permanent. They bend, hide, combine, resurface. Scholars still disagree about exactly how quickly distinct African identities blended into new Creole cultures in different colonies, because the process varied so much by place, language, and population. But there is no serious doubt that cultural creation was happening constantly, even under extreme coercion. Survival was not passive, it required invention. So as you move into the first labour of the day, you carry more than fatigue, you carry memory. Even if some of it belongs to elders rather than to you, you carry instructions passed softly from one person to another, how to watch, how to avoid unnecessary notice, how to save energy, how to stretch a ration, how to read weather, how to notice which adult can be trusted with a child, how to keep a little private self untouched, or as untouched as possible. When nearly everything else is exposed to control, you also carry uncertainty. That may be one of the heaviest things. You do not know whether today will remain ordinary by local standards. You do not know whether someone will be singled out. You do not know whether news will arrive from a port, a market, a neighbouring plantation, or an owner in a different mood than yesterday. Life under slavery often means living inside somebody else's unpredictability. Rules exist, but whim exists too, and whim can be worse. The work begins in earnest, tools are lifted, orders come sharper now. The air changes as bodies warm and exert themselves. You smell fresh-cut vegetation, churned earth, sweat beginning, smoke thinning, breakfast fires dying down, mud clings to ankles, wood handles press into palms, fabric sticks to the skin. The day settles on your shoulders with a familiar weight. Still, this first hour tells you nearly everything. It tells you that life for black Americans born into slavery in 1720 is immediate, physical, and relentless. It is made of textures and temperatures as much as laws. It is shaped by statutes written far away, and by the sound of one person clearing his throat nearby. It is public and private at once. It is hunger, caution, skill, exhaustion, and adaptation folded together before the sun is fully up. It is a world where your humanity is denied on paper and proven every minute by the way you endure, perceive, remember, and care. And as the light finally spreads across the yard, across the field, across the rough walls behind you, the truth becomes unavoidable. You have awakened inside a system built to use every possible part of your day, but the system has not erased your senses. It has not erased your mind. It has not erased the quiet knowledge, passing from person to person in glances and murmurs, that you are more than the morning that claims you. The day you are born is not treated as a beginning in the way people now like to imagine. No choir of sentiment rises around your first breath. No law steps forward to protect your smallness. You arrive in a room where pain, effort, blood, and fear are familiar companions, and almost immediately your life is measured in terms that have nothing to do with innocence. You are not only a child, you are also an asset, an inheritance, a future worker, a future mother of more property if you are a girl, a future labouring body if you are a boy. It is a terrible arithmetic, cold, efficient, and very proud of itself. You begin in a space that smells of sweat, iron, damp linen, smoke, and herbs. The air is thick and warm if the weather is mild, or sharply cold around the edges if winter has pushed itself through the walls. A woman bends over your mother, perhaps another enslaved woman skilled in birthing, perhaps someone older who has seen many deliveries and does not need a title to know what to do. Her hands are steady, her voice stays low. She knows how to wipe your face, how to ease your mother through pain, how to listen for danger in the room and beyond it. Childbirth in 1720 is dangerous for everyone, but danger is not shared evenly. Enslaved women face exhausting labour before birth, poor nutrition, limited rest, exposure to illness, and little control over their own bodies. Pregnancy does not lift work from their shoulders for long. In many colonies, an enslaved woman may work deep into pregnancy, then return to labour sooner than her body is ready. There is no gentle retreat into protected motherhood. Recovery is often brief, incomplete, and ignored by those who profit from her survival. She's expected to endure because the system is built on that expectation. Your mother hears you cry, and in that sound there is relief. Perhaps love so strong it feels painful. Perhaps worry arriving instantly beside it. She does not need anyone to explain the world you have entered. She knows that in many English colonies the status of the child follows the mother. This legal principle, made firm in places such as Virginia through 17th century statutes, means that if your mother is enslaved, you are enslaved from birth. That is one of the cruelest legal inventions in colonial America. It turns motherhood into a pipeline for ownership. It transforms birth from a family event into a commercial one. The phrase sounds dry when lawyers write it. In practice, it is intimate and brutal. It means your tiny fingers can curl around your mother's skin, and still another person can claim you. It means your first hours are wrapped in affection and threat at the same time. It means the law enters the room before you can even focus your eyes. You are washed as best you can be. Perhaps with warm water if it is available. Perhaps with scraps of cloth already used too many times. Your skin feels air suddenly and sharply. You protest, because of course you do. A newborn has no interest in colonial legal theory. You care only about cold, hunger, closeness, warmth, and the rhythm of a heartbeat against your ear. Very sensible of you. It may be the wisest attitude in the room, around you. Life does not stop. Outside the cabin or quarters, work continues. Footsteps pass. Tools knock against wood. Someone calls out. A child laughs briefly, then is hushed. The smell of boiling cornmeal or broth may drift in and mix with smoke and earth. Your arrival matters deeply to the people who love you, but the machinery of slavery does not pause out of respect. It is a system with all the tenderness of a mill wheel. Your mother may name you in a way that carries memory. The name might come from kin, from an African naming tradition, adapted to new circumstances, from a biblical source, from an owner's preference, or from the strange compromise created when all these forces collide. Names among enslaved people in the colonies could be layered things. Publicly, One name, privately, another meaning. Sometimes a child carried the day name tradition known in parts of West Africa, sometimes not. Historians still argue over how strongly specific naming customs survived in different regions, because the evidence is scattered and filtered through records made by people who rarely care to listen carefully. But even where official documents flatten identity, everyday life often preserved more than the archives admit. As you grow from a newborn to an infant, your value is observed in ways that would make the skin crawl if the people doing the observing had any skin left to crawl with. Enslavers might note the number of births among enslaved women because future labour can be calculated, counted, and discussed. Not every colony in 1720 is equally focused on natural increase. In some places, especially where importation from the Atlantic trade remains strong, planters still rely heavily on buying people rather than waiting for births. In other places, reproduction within the enslaved population becomes more economically important. The emphasis varies by region, crop, mortality rates, and the balance of African-born and colonial-born populations. But the underlying principle remains horrifyingly stable. Your body can be looked at not as a child's body, but as an investment. This does not mean your family sees you that way. Quite the opposite. That is one of the central tensions of your earliest life. To the people around you, you're precious in all the ordinary human ways. You're held when you fuss. You're rocked. You're sung to in a low tone while firelight trembles on the wall. Someone strokes your forehead with a thumb. Someone laughs at the way you grip a finger too fiercely. Someone worries over every cough, every rash, every sign of fever. Love survives here not because conditions are kind, but because people insist on loving anyway. Your first world is sensory. Wood grain under a hand, wool against your cheek, the smell of milk, the sour smell of wet cloth drying near a fire, the buzz of insects in warm weather, the sound of night creatures outside, frogs and crickets and distant dogs, the tremor of an adult voice in your chest when someone speaks while holding you. A baby learns security through repetition, but repetition under slavery is never fully secure. Daily care exists inside instability. Your mother may have little time to remain still with you. Another woman might carry you while she works nearby. Older children may help watch you. Grandmothers, aunts by blood, aunts by affection, and women who have buried children of their own may all become part of the net that catches you when one pair of arms is pulled away. Communal child-rearing is not only cultural preference here, it is necessity. A child often survives because care is distributed among many people who are themselves overworked. There is a physical knowledge in this care. Someone knows how to wrap you snugly. Someone knows which herbs might settle a stomach. Someone knows how to quiet colic with rocking or warmth. Someone knows that a certain cry means hunger, while another cry means discomfort, and another means fever might be coming. Colonial medicine is uncertain for everyone, and among enslaved communities healing draws from a blend of African traditions, native knowledge in some regions, European practices, and pure hard-won observation. Some remedies help, some do nothing, some may harm. That was true across the 18th century. But knowledge passed hand to hand remains one of the few protections available to you. A curious detail from colonial records shows how distorted the wider society could be. Some enslavers and visitors commented admiringly, in a detached and almost clinical way, on the seeming toughness of enslaved mothers and infants, as if endurance were natural rather than forced. Imagine watching people survive harsh conditions you created, then congratulating yourself on their resilience. That takes a very special kind of moral laziness. As you become a toddler, the world widens. Dirt becomes something to pat, kick, taste, and sit in. Chickens fascinate you. So do dogs. Puddles, shadows, spoons, bits of string, and the mysterious urge to place absolutely everything into your mouth. You wobble through yards and doorways while adults keep half an eye on you between tasks. Your feet learn heat from sun-baked ground and cool damp from morning earth. You hear more words than anyone realizes, and slowly you begin to sort voices into categories of safety and caution. No one hands you a formal lesson on rank, but you absorb it. There are people whose steps make adults tense. There are spaces where you must not wander. There are objects you must never touch. There are times when noise is tolerated and times when silence is wiser. Children are excellent students of atmosphere. It is one of their least charming but most useful talents. By the age of 4, 5, or 6, many enslaved children begin performing small labour. The tasks differ by place. You may carry water, gather fuel, watch younger children, pick up stones from fields, chase birds from crops, or run errands. Nothing looks grand. That is how systems like this hide their appetite. They begin with tasks small enough to seem harmless, then make them normal. Work arrives dressed as helping. Soon it is simply expected. Yet childhood is not entirely erased. It bends around constraint. Children still play when minutes open up. They fashion games from scraps, pebbles, sticks, rags, and imagination. They sing, mimic adults, race each other, invent rules, break them, cry loudly, forgive quickly, and laugh with their whole bodies. The sound of children laughing in an enslaved yard is one of history's most defiant noises. It does not mean things are fine. It means life refuses neat cooperation with oppression. You also grow under the gaze of counting. Your height, your health, your strength, your temperament, all may be noticed. An owner might describe a child as likely, sturdy, troublesome, promising, or weak. Such words sound casual, but they are edged with purpose. In a slave society, description often leads to valuation. Someone might decide where you will be most useful before you are old enough to understand the decision. Some children in 1720 are hired out, lent, gifted, inherited, or included in estate divisions when owners die. An inventory can list human beings beside livestock, furniture, tools, and barrels. The record-keeping of slavery has a way of making horror look tidy. Ink lines, item numbers, neat columns, and there you are, reduced to a phrase, boy child, Negro girl, value assigned. It is chilling not because it is chaotic, but because it is organized. For your family. These possibilities turn ordinary days into uncertain ground. Affection carries tension because attachment can be punished by separation. A mother may study your face while you sleep and wonder how long she'll be allowed to keep seeing it. A father may teach you a skill while knowing he cannot control what will eventually be demanded of you. Adults often become experts in loving fiercely without speaking every fear aloud. There is also the question of fathers, and here the archive turns slippery. Some fathers live nearby and are active in daily life. Some belong to neighbouring plantations and can visit only at intervals. Some are absent through sale, distance, death, or forced circumstance. Some children are born after coercion or assault by white men who wield power over enslaved women. The silence around such violence in many documents does not mean it was rare. It means the people keeping the records were often the beneficiaries of that silence. Scholars disagree over how often paternity can be recovered in specific regions because evidence is fragmentary. But no serious account of slavery can ignore the sexual vulnerability built into the system. As you grow, language itself becomes part of your inheritance. You may hear African words, English commands, local accents, prayer language, work songs, nursery sounds, and jokes too dry for any child to appreciate properly. Speech becomes a map of survival. You learn what can be said openly and what must be tucked inside tone, glance, or metaphor. Even a lullaby can carry more than comfort. It can carry memory. And so the truth of being born into slavery in 1720 becomes plain in the smallest details. Your life begins in dependence, as all lives do. But that dependence is quickly surrounded by ownership claims no child should ever bear. The adults who love you must protect you inside a system that studies your future usefulness. Your first steps take place on ground already marked by labour. Your first name may belong to two worlds at once. Your first lessons are not about freedom, but about navigation. Still, one fact remains larger than the legal one. Before any inventory, before any statute, before any planter's calculation, you're received by human hands, tired hands, careful hands, frightened hands, loving hands. The law may announce that you belong to property. The people around you answer, quietly but persistently, that you belong to them too, not in ownership, but in kinship, in memory, in responsibility, in hope. In a world determined to turn birth into possession, that fragile circle of care is where your life truly starts. By the time the sun has fully claimed the sky, your world is arranged around labour. Not one kind of labour, but many. The colonial economy in 1720 has a remarkable gift for inventing new ways to turn human effort into profit, and then calling the result order. You enter fields, yards, kitchens, wharves, barns, sheds, and workshops where every movement is measured by usefulness. The work changes by region, season, crop, age, sex, and the ambitions of the people who hold power over you. The pressure does not. If you live in the Chesapeake, tobacco often shapes the entire day. The plant is demanding from the moment the seed is started. Seed beds must be prepared carefully. Young plants are watched, protected, and then transplanted. Later come weeding, hoeing, thinning, topping, and the unpleasant business of removing worms by hand. Tobacco has the personality of a spoiled aristocrat. It wants constant attention, and the people in charge are delighted to make that your problem. The fields smell sharp and green in the early hours. Crushed leaves release a bitter scent into the damp air. The soil clings to your feet and cakes around ankles. Your hands grow sticky from plant sap and dirty from earth. When the sun rises higher, heat settles on your back like an extra layer of clothing nobody invited. Sweat moves down your neck and into rough cloth. Insects find every exposed patch of skin with admirable enthusiasm. If you are in South Carolina, rice work may define your life instead. Rice cultivation in the Low Country is infamous for its difficulty. The work often takes place in wet ground or managed water systems that require deep knowledge of irrigation, flooding, drainage, and timing. Many enslaved Africans forced into this labour came from regions where rice cultivation was already well understood, and planters valued that knowledge while pretending the people carrying it were somehow lesser beings. It is one of slavery's favourite tricks. Steal skill, then deny the humanity of the skilled. Rice fields feel different from tobacco land. The air is heavier. Marsh smells rise from standing water, mud, and rotting vegetation. Mosquitoes drift and whine near your ears. Frogs call from the edges. The mud sucks at your legs with rude determination. Your body is wet, then dry, then wet again. The work is hard on the feet, the back, and the nerves. Disease thrives in such environments. Fever is never very far away. Elsewhere, indigo may stain the rhythm of the plantation. Indigo is valuable because it produces blue dye, and the process of turning plant matter into a usable product is messy, smelly, and exacting. The vats, the fermenting leaves, the heavy odours, the stirring and processing all bring a different texture to the day. Indigo production can leave hands discoloured and clothing marked, as if even the labour wants to linger visibly after the task ends. Colonial wealth often arrives looking elegant in Europe because it was filthy somewhere else first. Not all enslaved people work in fields. That is important, because plantation slavery can dominate the imagination so completely that it flattens everything around it. In towns and on farms, enslaved black Americans also labour as carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, brickmakers, sailors, drivers, laundresses, cooks, dairy workers, seamstresses, porters, gardeners, stable hands, and nursemaids. A skilled worker may shape wood, repair wheels, shoe horses, stitch garments, mend nets, or haul goods through bustling port streets. Skill can bring a measure of bargaining value, sometimes slightly better food, sometimes wider movement, sometimes nothing at all except more responsibility. A workshop has its own music. Hammer against iron, saw through timber, the scratch of a plane, the creak of leather, the hiss of hot metal meeting water, smoke and soot settle in the nose, the floor holds wood shavings or charcoal dust. Your fingertips learn texture through repetition. Rough board, smooth handle, hot hinge, cool nail, damp hide. A person in such a space may develop expertise that others depend on, while remaining legally unfree. The contradiction sits in the room like an unwelcome supervisor. In domestic service, the labour becomes more intimate and often more heavily watched. You might rise before daylight to carry water, clean hearths, scrub floors, wash linens, chop vegetables, turn spits, knead dough, polish metal, empty slops, dress children, or tend fires. Kitchens smell of grease, smoke, onions, yeast, soap, ash, and wet wood. Hands stay busy from first light until late evening. Heat from the hearth presses into your face while your back remains cold from the room behind you. You're close to food all day and may still go hungry. History has a nasty sense of irony. Children enter this world gradually, though gradually is doing generous work in that sentence. A small child may begin by carrying messages or bringing gourds of water to adults in the fields. Another may collect chips of wood for fuel, watch a baby, wave branches to keep birds off a crop, or pick up whatever drops behind more experienced workers. These tasks can look minor, but they are part of a long training in obedience, endurance, and usefulness. The colonial labour system does not waste available hands. However tiny, you learn posture early, how to bend without losing balance, how to lift from the legs if you can, how to carry on the head or hip, how to keep pace without appearing slow, how to avoid drawing attention by moving either too lazily or too eagerly. There is an art to surviving work under constant supervision. Efficiency matters, but so does reading the mood of the person watching. Too much energy may raise expectations. Too little may invite punishment. You spend years walking that narrow line. The pace of labour depends on the season. Planting time brings urgency. Harvest brings a different sort of urgency. Winter may reduce some field demands but increase maintenance, repair, spinning, mending, cutting wood, salting meat, and tending animals. There is no long pastoral pause in which the labourers gaze dreamily across the landscape and discuss the poetry of agricultural life. Colonial farming leaves little room for that sort of nonsense. The cows are unimpressed by poetry anyway. In the tobacco regions, harvest is especially intense. Plants are cut, hung, cured in barns, then sorted and packed. The smell changes from fresh green bitterness to a heavier leaf scent. Barn interiors can feel close and dusty. Leaves crackle under dry conditions. Stalks scrape your arms. The work demands speed and care because damaged tobacco can mean lost value. When profit hangs from rafters, people with power suddenly become very attentive to detail. On plantations with livestock, enslaved workers may handle cattle, pigs, sheep, or horses. Barnyards bring their own sensations. Hay dust floats in shafts of light. Leather tack creaks. Horses snort and stamp. The smell of manure sits thick in the air, mixed with feed, sweat, and damp boards. Stable work requires timing and confidence. Animals can injure a careless person quickly. Yet many enslaved workers became highly knowledgeable handlers, trusted with creatures apparently granted more formal value than the people tending them. There is a bleak joke hiding in that fact, and everyone hears it. In towns such as Charleston, Williamsburg, Annapolis, New York, or Philadelphia, enslaved labour may be folded into urban life. You move through streets where carts rattle over uneven ground and merchants shout near warehouses. Salt air blows in from the harbour. Fish, tar, molasses, sewage, and bread all compete in the same crowded breeze. Enslaved dockworkers load barrels, roll casks, carry crates, and help connect the colonial interior to Atlantic trade. The port is noisy, busy, and full of information. News travels with ships, sailors, and rumours, all three equally damp. Urban slavery can create a slightly different experience of movement and contact. Some enslaved people hired out in towns encounter more strangers, hear more languages, and learn more about prices, ships, politics, and distant events than those kept deep in rural plantations. That does not make the condition mild. It simply changes the texture of control. More people around you can mean more witnesses, more opportunities, more temptations, and more danger all at once. One less familiar detail from the period involves specialised craftsmanship. Some enslaved artisans became so skilled that owners advertised their abilities with pride, hiring them out for extra profit or relying on them to maintain plantation tools and buildings. An ironworker, a cooper, or carpenter could be indispensable to an estate's operation. Yet the more valuable the skill, the more tempting it could be for an enslaver to exploit it relentlessly. Excellence did not necessarily bring protection. Sometimes it just meant you were useful in more rooms. The workday is governed by both the clock and the sun, though not always by mechanical timepieces. Bells, horns, shouted orders, customary routines, and the angle of light tell you when to begin, pause, change tasks, or stop. Midday may bring a short break to eat. The meal is practical, often cornmeal again, perhaps beans, perhaps a bit of salted meat or fish, perhaps greens or whatever garden produce can be grown, traded or stretched. You eat quickly, often outdoors, with dust on your hands and little chance to rest fully. Sitting still for even a few minutes can feel luxurious enough to be suspicious. The body pays for everything. Shoulders ache, fingers crack, knees stiffen, necks burn under sun, feet toughen and still hurt. For women, labour expectations often continue through pregnancy and nursing, which adds another layer of strain. For men, heavier hauling may be demanded, though the divisions are not neat and work categories can blur. Children absorb fatigue almost as soon as they absorb language. By adolescence, many have bodies already shaped by repetitive strain. Weather rules the mood of labour. Rain turns paths slick and clothing heavy. Cold makes fingers stubborn and raw. Heat slows thought and speeds tempers. Wind can feel glorious for exactly 9 seconds before it fills your eyes with dust. Thunderstorms bring sudden darkness, sharp smells, and a kind of suspense. Sometimes work continues right up to the point where sky and ground seem equally angry. Enslaved people develop countless techniques for making labour slightly more bearable. A cloth wrapped a certain way can reduce rubbing on the head while carrying weight. A grip adjusted by habit can save the wrist. A song can set rhythm for hoeing, rowing, grinding, or lifting. Joke muttered at the right moment can keep weariness from swallowing the whole spirit. These strategies matter. They are not dramatic acts. They are daily engineering of survival. Historians continue to debate how much autonomy some enslaved workers had under particular labour systems, especially in regions where task labour developed more clearly. In parts of the Low Country, for instance, some workers were assigned specific tasks rather than being driven continuously from dawn to dusk, at least in theory. Once a task was completed, a person might gain a little time for personal gardening, fishing, mending, or family needs. But scholars disagree over how consistently this operated in 1720 and how much benefit it truly offered, since task size, supervision, season, and planter temperament could alter everything. A system does not become kind merely because its methods vary. What remains constant is the conversion of your waking strength into someone else's wealth. Fields feed markets, workshops maintain estates, kitchens sustain households, yards store goods, docks launch trade. Every space asks something from your body, and each space teaches you different habits of attention. In the field, you watch rows, weather, and the person on horseback. In the kitchen, you watch flames, boiling pots, and changing moods. In the workshop, you watch tools, measurements, and your own fingers. Losing focus can mean injury, blame, or worse. By evening, the smells of labour cling to you. Smoke, sweat, leaf, iron, mud, soap, flour, manure, river water, stale wool. The body carries the workplace home because there is no clean line between the two. Your hands remember motions after the task ends. Sometimes they continue twitching slightly while at rest. That is one of labour's quieter victories. Yet even inside this enormous machinery, skill remains real. Knowledge remains real. The people forced to build, plant, cook, haul, mend, forge, wash, and tend this world are not blank labour units. They're observant, adaptive, inventive, and practiced. The colonial economy depends on their intelligence while pretending only ownership matters. That lie sits at the centre of everything. So when you walk through the field, the yard, or the workshop in 1720, you're not simply seeing people work. You're seeing an entire society reveal its priorities. Profit over comfort, extraction over dignity, control over rest. But you're also seeing something the system cannot fully hide. You're seeing mastery carried in the hands of people denied freedom. You're seeing endurance made physical. You're seeing labour that builds a continent, even while the labourers themselves are told they own nothing at all. By the time work releases its grip for the evening, or at least loosens two fingers, the question of comfort becomes very simple. There is almost none. Life in 1720 is lived close to rough material realities, and for black Americans held in slavery. Those realities are sharpened by neglect. Clothing is coarse because it is meant to last, not please. Food is rationed because feeding you well costs money. Shelter is built to contain labourers, not to honour human needs. Yet in these hard conditions, people still cook, mend, patch, wash, improvise, and protect one another with a seriousness that turns survival into a craft. Your clothes are often the first thing your body complains about. Fabric scratches at the neck and wrists. Seams rub the skin raw in hot weather. In cold weather, the cloth may be too thin to keep wind from slipping through. Linen and coarse wool are common, depending on season and region. Homespun cloth is practical and cheap by colonial standards, which is another way of saying it usually feels like a sack with ambitions. Garments may be issued once or twice a year, sometimes less generously than that, and a single shirt, shift, petticoat, pair of breeches, or jacket can be worn until the fibres practically surrender from exhaustion. Shoes are not guaranteed. Some enslaved people receive crude leather shoes, especially in colder regions or seasons, but many go barefoot for long stretches. Bare feet learn the colony intimately. They know the sting of frost crust on morning ground. They know splinters from rough flooring, the sucking pull of mud, the dry bite of stubble, the heat of packed paths at noon. The souls toughen, but toughness is not the same as comfort. People often wrapped rags around damaged feet when they could. A body becomes inventive when nobody else plans to protect it. Children's clothing is often even simpler. Young children may wear little at all in warm weather, or a rough shirt that hangs almost to the knees. This is partly economy, partly climate, and partly indifference from those in power. Childhood modesty is not a major concern when the main question asked of a child is how soon those small hands can become useful. Still, family members watch over children's bodies carefully, adjusting cloth, retying scraps, checking for rashes, insect bites, or cuts. Care survives in the details nobody records. Laundry is relentless. Clothes absorb sweat, smoke, dirt, grease, leaf stains, and the odours of labour. Washing them means hauling water, heating it, scrubbing fabric against itself or against boards, wringing it out with aching wrists, and hanging it where air can do the rest. Soap is harsh, often homemade from lion animal fat. It cleans, but with all the gentleness of an insult. Hands crack from it, knuckles chap, fabric stiffens. But a washed garment, even a badly worn one, offers a small dignity. It smells less of yesterday. Mending matters because replacement is uncertain. A tear at the knee becomes a patch. A frayed cuff is folded and restitched. A missing tie is replaced with cord. A worn blanket is pieced together from what remains of older cloth. Needlework can be practical, fast, and ingenious. Some enslaved women become expert at prolonging the life of textiles that any reasonable person would already have buried with honour. A patched shirt is not only clothing, it is time saved, cold delayed, exposure reduced. Food comes with its own hard arithmetic. Rations vary by colony, plantation, labour system, and the willingness of the enslaver to spend money on the people producing that money. Cornmeal is common across many British colonies because maize is abundant, cheap, and filling. It can be made into mush, porridge, hoe cakes, or bread. Salted pork or fish may appear in small amounts. Beans, peas, and greens sometimes supplement the diet. In better circumstances, enslaved people maintain provision grounds or gardens, growing vegetables like sweet potatoes, yams, squash, collards, cowpeas, or okra where region and opportunity allow. Such plots can become precious sources of nutrition and a tiny measure of control. The smell of evening food carries through the quarters or yard with a force almost emotional. Wood smoke settles low, a pot bubbles, cornmeal thickens slowly, greens soften with salt and fat if there is any to spare. Fish, if dried or salted, gives off a sharp scent before it enters the stew. Onions, when available, sweeten the air. Hunger sharpens every note. Even plain food can feel luxurious when the body has been emptied by labour. Meals are rarely leisurely. You eat from wooden bowls, gourds as coarse plates, or whatever vessels are at hand. Spoons may be shared, carved, or improvised. Fingers do their part. The food is hot if fortune is smiling, lukewarm if timing fails, and swallowed quickly all the same. Yet the meal can also be social. People speak in lower voices. Someone teases a child for eating too fast. Someone saves a better portion for an older relative. Someone shifts a sleeping baby from one shoulder to the other while stirring the pot. Community enters the meal even when abundance does not. A quirky but revealing detail of colonial food life is that many ingredients now considered central to Southern and American cooking were shaped profoundly by African knowledge and taste. Okra, black-eyed peas, rice preparation methods, seasoning habits, and certain one-pot cooking traditions did not simply appear by magic in colonial kitchens. Enslaved Africans and their descendants carried techniques, preferences, and agricultural knowledge that changed what people ate across the colonies. The people denied credit were often the people making the food worth eating. History can be impressively rude that way. Hunger remains a steady companion despite all this skill. Rations may not meet the calories demanded by intense labour. Seasons bring shortages. Salt meat spoils. Gardens fail. Fishing or hunting opportunities are restricted or risky. A growing child may go to sleep still hungry. An adult may set aside part of a meal for someone weaker or younger. The body learns to live with incompleteness. Stomachs growl in the dark. People joke about food because sometimes joking is the only seasoning available. Shelter offers protection, but only in the narrowest sense. Housing for enslaved people in 1720 varies by colony and wealth, but it is generally cramped, underbuilt, and plain. A cabin may be made of logs, rough boards, or a mix of clay and timber. Roofs can leak. Floors may be dirt or crude planks. Windows, if present, are small and uncovered or shuttered. Air moves through cracks in winter and refuses to move in summer. Smoke from the hearth stains walls and lungs alike. Inside, furnishings are few. A bedstead might exist, but many sleep on simple pallets, straw ticks, blankets, or directly on boards. Straw has to be changed when possible because it flattens, mildews, and collects pests. Blankets are treasured when nights turn cold. A stool, a chest, pegs on a wall, maybe a table if space permits. These are modest luxuries. Personal possessions are limited, but not absent. A bowl, a cup, a knife, a comb, a cloth bundle, a charm, a shell, a scrap of ribbon. These small objects can hold more meaning than the grand furniture in the main house ever will. At night, the cabin becomes a chamber of layered sensation. Firelight trembles against the wall. Smoke lingers in the rafters. Breath warms the air close to sleeping bodies. Crickets chirp outside. Rain on the roof can sound soothing for 1 minute and threatening the next if the roof is already unreliable. Insects whine. A baby sighs in sleep. Someone turns over and the whole pallet rustles. Privacy is scarce. Intimacy is unavoidable. Cleanliness is an effort, not a state. Water must be fetched. Soap must be made or obtained. Time must be carved out. Bodies are washed in basins, with cloths, at streams, or with hurried splashing from buckets depending on conditions. Hair care matters deeply and takes skill, though available tools are limited. Combs, fingers, oils, greases, cloth wraps, and patient hands all play their part. The grooming of children can be especially tender, even when done quickly. A head between your knees, careful parting, braiding, smoothing, soothing. It is not vanity. It is care made visible. Hair and dress can also hold cultural meaning that outlives forced migration. Specific African hairstyling traditions are difficult to trace neatly in the record, because colonial observers often ignore details that did not interest them. Historians continue to debate how much continuity and style can be documented clearly in particular regions during the early 18th century. But there is broad agreement that grooming practices carried identity, status, and practical knowledge. Even when styles changed under colonial pressure, the act of tending hair remained socially significant. Sleep itself is fragile. After heavy labour, the body may feel ready to collapse. But pain has its own opinions. Muscles twitch, shoulders ache, coughing starts once the room settles. Cold feet remain cold long after lying down. A child might whimper from hunger. An elder may snore with the authority of a person who has earned it. Then there is the fact that nighttime does not always guarantee safety. Summons can come. Illness can rise suddenly. Weather can intrude. Anxiety likes the dark just as much as dreams do. Still, people make homes inside these limits. Not ideal homes, not secure homes, but lived-in ones. A broom of bundled twigs sweeps the floor. A pot is kept clean. A blanket is folded carefully. A small garden is edged with attention. A child is taught where to place kindling. Someone hangs herbs to dry. Someone saves bacon grease in a little container because tomorrow it might matter. Order, in this setting, is not trivial. It is a way of insisting that life is more than what has been imposed. The contrast between the enslaved quarters and the enslaver's house can be painful and deliberate. One side may have glazed windows, featherbeds, imported ceramics, silverware, candles, curtains, books, and separate rooms. The other side has patched cloth, smoke, cramped sleeping space, and ration food. The architecture itself lectures you on hierarchy. It says who is meant to be comfortable and who is expected to endure. Colonial society loved giving moral speeches about order while arranging material life like a diagram of cruelty. Yet skill quietly rearranges that diagram every day. Enslaved cooks stretch poor ingredients into nourishing meals. Gardeners coax vegetables from difficult soil. Mothers turn rags into wrappings. Fathers repair walls with scavenged materials. Grandparents soothe fevers with practiced remedies. Children learn to carry embers safely, to fetch water without spilling, to watch a pot before it burns. Domestic life under slavery is hard, but it is not empty. It is full of labour that serves family rather than profit, even when stolen time is all that allows it. Another revealing truth is that many enslaved people traded, bartered, fished, trapped, or cultivated small plots to supplement what they were given. The amount of freedom to do this varied widely, and some enslavers restricted it more than others. But where it happened, these activities could improve diet, create tiny personal stores, and strengthen local networks. A chicken, a basket of greens, a little corn, a few fish. These might be the difference between scraping by and managing slightly better. Small economies grew in the cracks of a larger inhuman one. Material deprivation shapes the mood of every day, but it does not fully define the people living within it. A rough shirt does not erase dignity. A smoky room does not cancel affection. A thin meal does not stop generosity. The conditions are harsh, undeniably harsh, but the response to them is active and intelligent. Survival requires judgment, timing, taste, patience, and memory. It requires knowing which plant can flavour a pot, which cloth can still take another patch, which part of the cabin wall needs stuffing before cold weather arrives, which child will wake hungry before dawn. So when you picture what life was really like in 1720, think beyond the broad fact of deprivation and enter the texture of it. Feel the scratch of coarse linen, smell the cornmeal at the fire, hear the spoon strike the side of the pot, touch the patched blanket, the cracked bowl, the damp wall, the warm hand guiding a child towards sleep. This is the domestic world built under pressure, maintained without enough resources, and still filled with acts of skill that keep life going. Not easy, not gentle, but fiercely made, night after night, from almost nothing at all. Love lives here under pressure. It is not the soft, leisurely kind celebrated in polished portraits or family Bibles with clean pages. It is practical, watchful, and often hurried. It arrives in shared food, whispered advice, a hand on a child's back, a glance that says be careful without needing words. In 1720, black families living in slavery build bonds in a world designed to keep those bonds fragile. Affection is not forbidden exactly, but it is never safe. That may be worse. You grow up inside a web of kinship that is both strong and vulnerable. A mother may anchor your world, not because she has power in the legal sense, but because she keeps daily life from flying apart. She wakes you, feeds you when she can, studies your face for illness, teaches you names, manners, warnings, and ways of moving through danger. Her care may be interrupted by labour demands at any moment, yet it remains the centre of your emotional life. She becomes expert at folding tenderness into whatever time is left over after the system has taken its share. Fathers are present in many different ways, and the variety matters. Some live in the same quarters and manage a family life within the narrow spaces allowed. Some belong to neighbouring plantations or farms and visit when distance, labour schedules, and permission make it possible. Some are carried away by sale, inheritance divisions, or reassignment long before their children can know them well. Some are gone because the records of slavery and the practices of power make stable fatherhood terribly difficult. Yet many fathers teach, protect, joke, discipline, and love whenever they can. A man might show a child how to braid rope, mend a fence, carry a bucket without wasting strength, or listen carefully before speaking. Instruction becomes another form of affection. Marriage itself occupies an uneasy place. In most colonies, enslaved marriages are not protected in the same way as legal unions among free people. Couples may form long-term partnerships recognized by community, custom, and personal commitment, yet those bonds can be ignored by owners whenever convenient. The feelings are real. The promises are real. The law shrugs. A husband and wife can share a life for years and still be treated as separate pieces of property. Colonial legal systems had a genius for recognizing profit and overlooking humanity. Courtship has to work around labor, surveillance, and distance. A young man may walk at night to see a woman on another plantation, guided by moonlight, habit, and determination. A young woman may smooth her hair carefully, adjust a worn garment, and speak with composure while older women watch with quiet interest. There might be teasing, songs, cautionary advice, and that universal community sport of pretending not to notice exactly what everyone notices. Even under slavery, people flirt. It would be nice if oppression at least had the decency to stop human attraction, but it does not. The physical world of family life is made from brief moments. A couple may sit together after evening labour while firelight softens the room. A mother may hum while the child falls asleep against her shoulder. Siblings may share a blanket and whisper in the dark. Grandparents or older neighbours may tell stories in low voices, passing along memory, humour, and warning all at once. The smell of smoke, cornmeal, damp wood, and tired bodies fills the air. Someone coughs, someone laughs quietly. Someone reaches for another hand in the dark. These are not grand scenes. They are the tiny architecture of belonging. Kinship often stretches beyond simple household categories. An aunt may be a blood relative, or a trusted older woman who feeds and corrects you with equal authority. A grandfather may be related by birth, marriage, or community recognition. Older children care for younger ones so regularly that they half become parents themselves. Such flexible kin networks are common because slavery keeps disrupting ordinary household stability. When legal protection is absent, family has to become both wider and more adaptive. This wider network is essential because children are always at risk of being pulled by labour away from the arms that know them best. A little child may spend much of the day with older siblings, elderly women, or groups of caregivers while parents work. These arrangements create intimacy across generations. You may learn patience from one woman, jokes from another, songs from an older child, and practical caution from everyone. Family knowledge comes at you from all sides. One unusual detail from early colonial life is how often enslaved children seem to have been socially raised by a larger circle than white observers bothered to notice. Estate papers and plantation accounts might list women by first name only, or children as simple quantities, yet daily life depended on webs of mutual support that those papers barely capture. Archives love neat columns. Human care prefers messy circles. The greatest threat hanging over family life is sale. Sale is not always imminent, but it is always possible, and that possibility changes how people feel time. An owner in debt may sell a man for cash. A widow inheriting property may divide an estate. A child promised as a gift or dowry may carry enslaved people with the transfer. A skilled worker may be hired out elsewhere. A family can wake up together and go to sleep knowing the ground under them is not solid. You do not need daily sales to create daily fear. You only need the knowledge that they can happen. This fear touches ordinary acts. When a mother braids a daughter's hair, she may wonder whether she's learning a face she will someday lose. When a father lifts his son onto a wagon, he may feel pride and dread in the same breath. Siblings may quarrel over nothing and then cling fiercely at bedtime because tomorrow is never fully guaranteed. Even happy moments carry a second shadow. Children sense this long before adults want them to. They notice tense voices when owners argue about money. They notice unusual visitors, horses in the yard, papers being discussed, names spoken too often. They notice when their mother's face hardens after a conversation that ended too quickly. Childhood under slavery includes a special education in atmosphere. It is advanced placement fear, though nobody asked to enroll. There is also the threat of forced movement short of sale. An owner may move people from one tract of land to another, from field labour to domestic service, from relative closeness to sudden separation across distance. A child sent to work near the main house may no longer spend the day among familiar companions. A woman moved after childbirth may lose the informal support network that sustained her. A man hired out in town may sleep away from his family for long periods. The system has many ways to break intimacy without the drama of an auction. Sexual coercion makes family life even more precarious. Enslaved women live under constant vulnerability to the desires of white men who wield social and legal power. This is not incidental. It is built into a world where one group controls the bodies of another. Such coercion can wound marriages, produce children under painful circumstances, and deepen the insecurity surrounding motherhood. The records rarely speak plainly, but silence is not innocence. Historians disagree on how often specific incidents can be documented in the early 18th century, because evidence is fragmentary and often filtered through hostile sources. Even so, the broader pattern is unmistakable. Yet families keep forming. This is one of the most remarkable truths of the period. People choose one another. They make commitments without legal protection. They raise children in circumstances that would make many modern people collapse by noon. They create rituals of belonging from almost nothing. A shared meal becomes a family meal because of who sits near whom. A sleeping arrangement becomes a household because of who reaches for whom in the night. A warning repeated with love becomes parenting. Children learn identity first through these relationships. You may not know your exact birthday in the formal sense, but someone remembers the season, the weather, who was present, what song was sung, what prayer was whispered, how hard the rain fell on the roof. You may not possess a written genealogy, but you know who comforted your mother, who carried you when she returned to work, who laughs like your grandfather, who braids hair like your aunt, who has your brother's eyes. Memory does family's bookkeeping. The emotional life of enslaved people is sometimes flattened in older accounts into simple suffering, as though pain were the only feeling available. Pain is certainly present, and deeply so, but it exists alongside humour, pride, jealousy, patience, embarrassment, delight, stubbornness, and warmth. A couple can quarrel over attention. A teenager can feel shy during courtship. A grandmother can be annoyed by noisy children even while loving them fiercely. A brother can boast too much about his strength. Ordinary emotions do not disappear under extraordinary oppression. They become more precious. Discipline within families also matters. Parents teach children obedience, but not for the same reasons owners demand it. A parent may scold a child for wandering, speaking too boldly, or for getting a warning because the consequences in this world can be severe. Love sometimes sounds sharp because danger is near. A mother may yank a child back by the arm and hiss instructions in a tone that feels severe, then hold that same child close later once the risk has passed. Protection is not always gentle in places built on threat. Religious practice can strengthen family bonds too. Prayers spoken together, biblical stories retold in evening quiet, or blended spiritual traditions carried through gesture and phrase all help create shared meaning. A child hearing a parent pray learns not only words, but also emotional posture, hope, endurance, gratitude for survival. Grief spoken upward because there is nowhere else safe to place it. Family and faith often rest in the same breath. There are also happy occasions, though happiness here is always a little guarded. A birth safely completed can bring smiles, food shared, songs hummed, perhaps a few moments when labour recedes enough for celebration to exist. A union between partners may draw community acknowledgement even if law refuses. A child surviving illness may feel like a feast day all by itself. Small victories matter because the wider system offers so few. A fringe tidbit survives in scattered reports and later recollections that some enslaved communities developed playful teasing customs around courtship and marriage, with older women or friends jokingly testing a young man's seriousness. The exact details are hard to pin down for 1720 specifically, and practices surely varied widely by region and cultural background. Still, the suggestion rings true to human nature. Even in hard times, Communities enjoy evaluating romantic competence with at least a little mischief. The loss of kin through death adds another layer of grief. Illness, overwork, childbirth, poor nutrition, and inadequate shelter make mortality an intimate fact of life. Children may lose siblings early, mothers may die young, elders may carry more memory than the next generation has time to receive. Mourning under slavery can be constrained by labour demands, yet people still grieve in visible and invisible ways. They cry, they sing, they sit in silence, they remember names, they keep objects, they tell stories. Love leaves traces even when formal monuments do not. What makes family life in 1720 especially poignant is its combination of fragility and determination. Nothing in the legal system guarantees that your family can remain intact. Almost everything in the social order works against its stability. And yet people persist in acting as mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, sisters, brothers, grandparents, cousins, and kin beyond blood. They refuse to let ownership define every relationship. So when you picture life born into slavery, picture this too. A child leaning against a mother's knee while she works with tired hands. Two people sharing a few quiet minutes by a fading fire. An older boy carrying his baby sister because their mother has no free arm. A father offering a joke so dry it floats like dust in the air. A grandmother touching a forehead to check for fever. A family made not secure by law, but held together by repetition, sacrifice, and memory. Threat surrounds them constantly. That is true, but so does care. And care, in such a world, becomes one of the boldest things a person can practice. Control in 1720 does not only arrive as an order shouted across a field, it arrives as a whole atmosphere. You feel it in the pause before answering a question, in the careful way people lower their eyes, in the silence that falls when certain footsteps pass nearby. Slavery depends on labour, yes, but labour alone is never enough for the people who profit from it. They want obedience, predictability, and submission that looks natural. So they build a world of surveillance, punishment, and ritual intimidation. Then call that world peace. It is a very colonial kind of peace, loud with threats, and proud of itself. From childhood, you learn that being watched is part of ordinary life. Someone may be supervising directly, an owner, an overseer, a driver, a mistress in the household, or an older enslaved worker pressed into monitoring others. Even when no one stands right beside you, the possibility of observation shapes your posture. You move as if eyes might be on you, because they often are. This is not paranoia, it is accuracy. The people enforcing control vary by place and scale. On a smaller farm, the owner may oversee labour personally, giving instructions face-to-face and expecting instant compliance. On a larger plantation, especially where cash crops dominate, an overseer may manage the workday, pushing pace, judging output, and reporting problems upward. In some settings, enslaved drivers hold intermediate authority, tasked with organising labour while living inside the same coercive system as everyone else. Their position can be fraught, resented, necessary, feared, and morally complicated all at once. Slavery adored a divided hierarchy. It made the machinery run more smoothly. Punishment is central to this machinery. It is not occasional misbehaviour correction in the ordinary sense. It is a deliberate system for making examples. Whippings are common across the colonies, carried out with switches, lashes, or other instruments meant to inflict pain and fear. The body becomes the site where power writes its message. Public punishment matters, especially because it teaches more than one person at a time. One individual is hurt so that many others will imagine themselves next. The sound of punishment can travel before the sight of it. A raised voice, the shuffle of people forced to gather, the ugly whistle of a lash through air. A cry cut short, The silence afterward is often worse than the noise. It leaves the lesson hanging. People return to work carrying not only sorrow or anger, Rose, but calculation. Who saw what? Who might be next? How to avoid drawing that kind of attention? Fear spreads efficiently because it requires no further labour once planted. Other punishments exist too. Reduced food, confinement, extra work, shackling, branding in some contexts, forced wearing of devices meant to shame or restrict movement, and threats of sale all enter the repertoire of control. The exact practices vary by colony and owner, but the broader pattern is unmistakable. Slavery is not maintained by custom alone. It is maintained by organised cruelty, backed by law and everyday enforcement. The system wants your body tired and your imagination narrowed. Law gives this cruelty a polished face. Colonial statutes in places like Virginia, South Carolina, Maryland, and elsewhere define enslaved people as property, restrict movement, limit assembly, regulate punishment, and harden racial boundaries over time. Blackness becomes linked in law to permanent servitude, while whiteness gathers privileges not because of virtue, but because the legal order chooses to distribute power that way. This is a mainstream fact that matters deeply. The law does not merely reflect prejudice, it manufactures it into structure. You may encounter passes or permissions controlling movement, especially where travel off a plantation or between properties is restricted. A black person moving without authorization can be stopped, questioned, whipped, jailed, or otherwise punished. Patrol systems become especially developed later in some regions, but even in 1720, there are already local practices of monitoring and stopping movement that treat black mobility as suspicious by default. Walking down a road becomes a political act when the road is not assumed to belong to you. Night is watched differently than day. After dark, control often sharpens. Fires glow in the quarters, voices lower, and any movement beyond expected boundaries can attract attention. Owners fear meetings, plots, theft, escape, and simply the fact that enslaved people might use the night for purposes not arranged by the plantation. Darkness gives cover, but it also gives cover to the people hunting for anyone who seems too independent. Moonlight can feel both beautiful and accusatory. Religion is often drafted into the service of control. Some white colonists insist that Christian teachings require obedience, using selected verses to present submission as holy duty. The argument is tidy and deeply self-serving. If you are willing to torture people for profit, apparently the next logical step is to lecture them about humility. Enslaved people may be exposed to prayers, sermons, and moral language that present earthly hierarchy as part of divine order. Yet the message does not land cleanly. Sacred ideas can be heard in more than one way. In some places, owners worry that baptism or Christian instruction might complicate property claims, especially earlier in the colonial period when legal categories still carried remnants of older assumptions about Christians and bondage. By 1720, many colonies have already clarified that baptism does not free an enslaved person. That clarification matters because it reveals what colonists feared most. Not spiritual confusion, but legal inconvenience. Heaven was acceptable. Manumission was not. Control also enters through naming and speech. Your owner may rename you, shorten your name, mock your pronunciation, or insist on forms of address that reinforce hierarchy. You're expected to answer in the right tone, stand at the right distance, use respectful language, and interpret vague commands quickly. A mistake may be treated as insolence, so speech becomes a field of risk. Too little response can seem defiant, too much can seem impertinent. Every conversation with power involves a kind of verbal tightrope walking. Children absorb this grammar early. They learn whom to call master or mistress, when to be silent, how to step aside, when to carry messages, and how quickly to obey. The adults teach these rules partly because survival demands it. A child corrected sharply by a parent may not understand that love is hiding inside the sharpness, but the parent understands. Better to scold now than watch a child punished later for ignorance of danger. One revealing oddity of colonial control is how anxious enslavers often are about things that look small. A gathering, a song, a shared tool, a whispered conversation, a path worn through the woods. The very scale of their suspicion tells you something. They know domination is never fully secure. They know people forced together develop loyalties, plans, humour, and private meanings. Enslavers may act like confident masters of a stable world, but confidence has a strange way of peeking through window cracks at night. The household can be its own theatre of discipline. In domestic settings, scrutiny is often constant because labour happens close to the enslaver's body and possessions. A servant may be corrected for a glance, a dropped plate, an under-seasoned dish, a child left crying too long, a shoe not cleaned properly, a garment folded the wrong way. Some mistresses cultivate a style of minute complaint that turns every hour into an examination. Exhaustion in such a space is not only physical, it is emotional abrasion. Control depends not only on punishment, but on unpredictability. Clear rules can be navigated. Whim is harder. One owner may tolerate a custom one day and punish it the next. One overseer may ignore a brief pause. Another may explode at it. This instability keeps people cautious. Historians sometimes describe slave societies as governed by arbitrary power, and that word matters. Arbitrary means you cannot fully reason your way to safety. You can be careful and still be harmed. The body remembers this. Shoulders tense when certain voices rise. The stomach tightens at the sound of a horse approaching. Sleep remains light because nighttime summons are possible. A person may flinch before contact even when the contact turns out harmless. Control works best when it no longer requires constant force because the nerves have learned the lesson in advance. Scholars still debate how uniformly harsh discipline was across specific plantations and colonies, because records are uneven and because planters often misrepresented themselves. Some owners portrayed their methods as paternal, moderate, or rational, while others were openly severe. But those distinctions can mislead if taken too seriously. A system does not become humane because one master prefers fewer lashes and more calculation. The power to punish without meaningful consent or legal equality remains the core fact. Information control matters too. Owners may try to limit what enslaved people know about markets, politics, legal changes, or events beyond the plantation. Literacy among enslaved people exists but is restricted and uneven, and in 1720 formal anti-literacy laws are not yet as fully developed everywhere as they will become later. Still, access to reading and writing is shaped strongly by power. Knowledge can unsettle hierarchy, so hierarchy treats knowledge with suspicion. A person who can read a note, count goods, or remember details accurately becomes slightly harder to contain. There is also the use of rewards, though calling them rewards can sound too generous. A little extra food, permission to visit family, a lighter task for a day, the chance to tend a garden plot, a holiday allowance, or praise for skilled work may all be used to encourage compliance. This does not soften the structure. It simply shows that domination often mixes carrot with stick when the carrot is cheap enough. A system based entirely on visible force is tiring to maintain. Occasional favour helps keep people calculating, hoping, and divided. Community gatherings among white colonists often reinforce the wider order too. Courts, churches, taverns, markets, militia musters, and local politics all help normalise slavery as ordinary social fact. Control is not just what happens on the plantation. It is supported by neighbours, magistrates, ministers, merchants, and family networks. The entire colony participates to different degrees. One of the most unsettling truths about slavery is how social it is. Many hands hold it up. A fringe tidbit from the era involves the fear of poison. White colonists in several slave societies sometimes became intensely suspicious that enslaved cooks, healers, or servants might poison food or drink. Some of these fears reflected actual acts or attempted acts, while many others were likely exaggerations shaped by paranoia. Either way, the obsession reveals a guilty imagination. When you dominate people so completely, even the dinner table starts to look dangerous. For the enslaved, daily discipline produces a complicated moral landscape. You may have to show deference you do not feel. You may apologize for things that are not wrong. You may protect another person by saying less than you know. You may witness suffering and be unable to intervene openly. None of this means your inner self agrees with the system. It means coercion rearranges behavior without fully possessing the mind. That distinction matters more than the masters ever want to admit. In this world, fear has texture. It is the dryness in your mouth before answering, the cold sweat when someone calls your name sharply, the sting on skin already healing from old hurt, the smell of leather, the pressure of silence among witnesses. It is also the strain of never being fully off duty, because caution follows you from field to cabin, from daylight to dark. Even rest must remain alert, and still, control is never total. That is why it must be performed so constantly. The laws multiply because people resist. Punishments are public because people keep private selves. Sermons are repeated because belief cannot be commanded as easily as labor. Surveillance expands because human beings continue forming attachments, judgments, and hidden intentions. Every mechanism of discipline is also evidence of incomplete mastery. So when you picture life under slavery in 1720, do not imagine violence as rare interruption. Imagine it woven into ordinary governance. Imagine rules carried by tone, gesture, and law. Imagine whole communities trained to accept the sight of domination as normal. Then look more closely. Beneath the surveillance, beneath the punishments, beneath the performances of authority, human awareness continues working quietly. You watch, you interpret, you endure. The system wants obedience to feel natural, but deep down, everybody involved knows it never is. When the labouring day finally loosens its grip, another world begins to breathe. It is quieter, less visible, and harder for the people in power to measure. This world lives in sound, rhythm, memory, gesture, and belief. It moves through the quarters at dusk, across fields at daybreak, beside cook fires, near birthing beds, over graves, and inside the thoughts people carry even when their mouths stay still. In 1720, black Americans in slavery are not only worked bodies, they are also makers of meaning. That fact matters because systems of bondage always try to starve the spirit along with the flesh. You hear this inner world first in voices. Someone hums while stirring a pot. Someone murmurs over a sleeping child. Someone speaks a blessing before eating. Someone laughs at a line too dry for daylight and too sharp for open use. In low conversation, words often carry more than one layer. A simple remark about weather can also be a warning. A joke can be criticism wearing a borrowed hat. A song can soothe a baby and steady an adult at the same time. Sound becomes shelter when walls cannot. Music does not require a stage, and that is fortunate, because nobody is building concert halls for the enslaved. Music lives in work rhythm, foot tapping, clapping, humming, call and response, and the rise and fall of speech itself. In the field, coordinated labour can be easier when a shared beat guides movement. In the yard, a short tune can turn fatigue into something more manageable. At night, singing may become softer, more private, more layered with memory. The human voice is the instrument that survives any inventory. The songs you hear in 1720 do not yet look exactly like the spirituals many people associate with later centuries, though some roots are already there. Musical life draws from many African traditions, from local invention, from Protestant hymns heard or adapted, and from the demands of labour itself. The result differs by region, language, background, and the balance between African-born and colony-born populations. The soundscape of slavery is never one simple thing. It is mixed, evolving, and full of improvisation. Historians still argue over how precisely certain musical forms developed this early in the mainland colonies, because the evidence is scattered and white observers often listened poorly. But the broader truth is clear. Music was everywhere people needed strength. You feel belief in more than songs. It lives in gestures around the body, in prayers whispered over illness, in naming practices, in respect for elders, in the care given to the dead, and in the sense that the world holds powers beyond the reach of owners and overseers. Some enslaved Africans arrive with Islamic knowledge. Others carry cosmologies rooted in West or Central African religious traditions. Others encounter Christianity in the colonies and interpret it through their own experience. Many lives hold some blend of these forces, not neatly sorted, but layered. Religion under slavery is rarely a tidy conversion story. It is more like a river delta, many channels moving through the same low ground. In a crowded cabin at night, someone may tell a biblical story in a way that lands differently from how a white preacher intends it. Deliverance matters, exile matters, captivity matters. A God who hears the cry of the oppressed sounds more interesting than a sermon about obedience, and you can understand why that message catches on. Even where Christianity is used by owners to encourage submission, enslaved listeners are capable of drawing their own conclusions. Oppression does not cancel interpretation, it sharpens it. At the same time, older beliefs continue moving quietly. Protective objects may be kept close. Certain roots or herbs may be valued not only for physical effects, but for spiritual meaning. The threshold of a home may be treated with care. Dreams may be discussed seriously. A person known for healing may also be known for spiritual power, and not everyone will separate those categories neatly. Colonial records often dismiss such practices as superstition, because colonial records have the imagination of a locked cupboard. Everyday people usually understand more than officials do. You can sense the atmosphere of these private practices in the details of evening life. The smell of crushed herbs near the fire, a cloth bundle tied carefully and tucked away, the soft insistence that a child not step over something placed near a doorway, a low prayer spoken with hands resting on an aching shoulder, a quiet gathering around someone ill, with voices pitched just above a whisper. In such moments, belief is not abstract. It is tactile, breathed, and domestic. One mainstream historical fact stands firmly here. In many regions of British North America, the early 18th century is a time of cultural formation among enslaved populations, especially as people from different African societies are forced together and must build new shared worlds. Language, ritual, kinship habits, and religious practice all begin adapting to colonial conditions. In places like the South Carolina Low Country, where African-born people remain numerous, some cultural continuities stay especially strong. In other regions, creolization moves differently. The specifics vary, but the making of new black cultures is already well underway. Stories matter as much as prayer. In the evening, narratives pass from mouth to mouth, carrying caution, amusement, and memory. Trickster tales thrive in hard places because tricksters understand unequal worlds. A small, clever figure outwits the stronger one. A boastful fool is exposed. Hunger becomes a problem solved by wit rather than rank. Such tales entertain children, but they also teach adults how power behaves. You don't need a formal lecture when a story can do the same work with better timing. A quirky tidbit from the wider Atlantic world fits here beautifully. Across African diasporic communities, trickster figures shift names and shapes, becoming spider, rabbit, or other sly creatures depending on region and later tradition. It is difficult to pin down exactly which versions are circulating in mainland English colonies in 1720 with perfect certainty, but the pattern of cunning storytelling is deeply rooted. The weak do not always win in real life. In stories, they get a fairer trial. Memory also lives in the body. A rhythm heard in childhood may be repeated years later with no written record. A food preparation method survives because hands remember what a tongue misses. A funeral gesture endures because elders insist that the dead deserve proper attention. A lullaby may hold fragments of a language the singer does not fully analyze, yet still keeps alive in sound. This is one reason slavery never produces the blank slate its defenders imagine. People remember in ways paper cannot easily seize. The treatment of the dead can reveal an entire moral universe. Death comes too often in 1720 through illness, childbirth, overwork, poor shelter, injury, and the general harshness of colonial life. Mourning under slavery is constrained, but it is not absent. Bodies may be washed, wrapped, prayed over, and buried with care when circumstances allow. The living gather in sorrow. Songs may be sung, and memory begins its work immediately. A grave is not only a place of ending, it is also a declaration that a person mattered, even if the law denied it. Scholars continue to debate how much specific African funerary practice remained visible in particular mainland regions this early, because the surviving descriptions are often fragmentary or filtered through hostile observers. Some evidence suggests continuities in grave goods, body orientation, or ritual behaviour in certain communities. Other cases are harder to prove. But uncertainty in the archive does not mean emptiness in life. It usually means the people doing the writing were not the people doing the mourning. Sound carries emotion in ways owners cannot fully regulate. A mother singing to a child may calm herself as much as the baby. Work songs can synchronize motion and reduce isolation. Spiritual singing can express sorrow without announcing every reason aloud. A moan, a hum, a repeated phrase, or a simple response line can hold grief, hope, sarcasm, and endurance together in one breath. Some of the deepest emotional history of slavery is probably hidden in tones nobody bothered to transcribe. Children absorb all of this naturally. They hear songs before they understand lyrics. They watch adults bow their heads, touch certain objects carefully, and lower their voices at particular names. They learn who in the community knows healing, who can interpret signs, who tells the best stories, who leads prayer, who remembers older ways. Education in this world does not need a schoolhouse to be real. It happens by firelight, by repetition, and by trust. Christianity, when taken up by enslaved people, rarely remains identical to the version offered by colonists. Biblical language of deliverance, justice, suffering, and redemption can be heard through enslaved experience in ways that make the story vibrate differently. Israel in bondage does not sound theoretical. The Valley of Dry Bones does not seem like decorative poetry. At the same time, Christian practice may mix with older African understandings rather than replacing them completely. A person can attend to scripture and still keep respect for ancestors, protective knowledge, or sacred signs in everyday life. Human beings are very capable of refusing neat categories when neat categories fail them. Gatherings for worship or shared devotion can be precious, whether formal or improvised. A few people in a cabin after dark may become a congregation simply by intention. Someone starts a prayer, another answers softly, a third adds a line of song, a child listens half asleep against an elder's shoulder. The air smells of tallow, smoke, and warm bodies. Outside, night insects pulse steadily. Inside, the room feels briefly larger than its walls. That enlargement is one of the soul's quieter miracles. Some colonists fear exactly this kind of gathering. Not always because they understand the spiritual power involved, though sometimes they do, but because any assembly outside direct white supervision appears threatening. Religion among the enslaved is never merely private from the perspective of the powerful. It creates bonds, common language, and a framework for judging right and wrong that does not depend on the master's approval. That alone makes it politically significant. There is also joy here. Genuine joy, though not simple joy. Children dancing in a circle, hands clapping in sync. An elder smiling as a songline lands just right. A storyteller pausing at the perfect moment while listeners lean in. Laughter breaking loose after a joke everyone knew was coming. These things do not erase suffering. They prove suffering has not erased everything else. People still recognize beauty. They still make it. Another curious detail from the period involves ring shouts and similar circular sacred movement traditions that become more clearly documented later. Whether the full form is already established in every mainland setting by 1720 is uncertain, and historians are careful about claiming too much too early. Still, the broad continuity of rhythmic collective movement, voice, clapping, and spiritual intensity in African diasporic life strongly suggest that embodied worship was already important in many places. The archive is often late to the party. What you see, then, is not religion as a side note. It is a whole emotional technology of survival. Faith helps people endure uncertainty. Music organizes effort and feeling. Story preserves wisdom. Memory fights erasure. Ritual gives shape to grief. Shared belief creates a moral space that slavery cannot fully occupy. Owners may command labor, punish bodies, and restrict movement. But they are never as successful at ruling the inner life as they imagine. So in the quiet hours of 1720, after orders have been given and tools set down, another order rises. You hear it in song, you smell it in herbs at the fire, you feel it in a hand resting on your head during prayer, you see it in the care shown to the sick, the dead, and the very young. This is the world of faith, music, and memory, made not from comfort or freedom, but from need, invention, and stubborn hope. It is soft in volume, yet enormous in strength. And for many people living through slavery, it is the place where the deepest part of the self keeps breathing. Resistance in 1720 does not always arrive with a trumpet blast or a dramatic escape under lightning. Most of the time it is quieter than that, and more constant. It lives in delay, in hidden knowledge, in careful speech, in tools misplaced at convenient moments, in food quietly shared, in paths remembered, in names preserved, in the simple refusal to let the self become exactly what the system demands. This kind of resistance can be hard to spot in the records because the records were usually kept by people who preferred to call it laziness, insolence, theft, or criminality. But from the inside, it often looks like thought, caution, and survival with teeth. You learn early that open defiance is dangerous. The colony has too many mechanisms ready to crush it. So many acts of resistance begin with judgment. When is the risk worth it? Who can be trusted? What can be done without inviting punishment on others? How much can be concealed beneath ordinary labour? None of this is simple. A person making such choices is not cowardly for avoiding spectacle. In a slave society, prudence can be one of the sharpest forms of intelligence. One common form of resistance is slowing the pace of work. Not always enough to be obvious, but enough to hold back a little of yourself from the endless appetite of the day. A hoe moves slightly less quickly. A task takes a little longer. A bundle is tied with deliberate care that just happens to consume extra minutes. A tool must be fetched from farther away than expected. A pot needs one more stirring. An order is obeyed, but not with quite the enthusiasm the master imagined. These are tiny thefts of time from a system built on stealing life by the hour. The body becomes part of this quiet strategy. You learn how to appear diligent while conserving strength. You learn which gestures satisfy the eye of an overseer and which motions are actually necessary. You learn how much weariness can be shown as accident. You learn how to protect your hands when possible, how to shift weight to spare the back, how to move neither too eagerly nor too slowly. A person denied control over labour often fights first for control over effort. Breakage and loss can belong to the same world. A tool disappears, a handle cracks sooner than it should. A piece of equipment suffers from poor maintenance that nobody felt urgently inspired to prevent. Livestock wanders through a gate not closed with perfect care. Something useful becomes less useful. The line between accident and intention may be impossible to prove, which is precisely the point. This is not romantic sabotage from a ballad. It is ordinary friction introduced into a machine that expects smooth obedience. Food becomes another quiet battlefield, a little extra cornmeal set aside, green shared where rationing would prefer they were not, fish caught and kept discreetly, fruit gathered on the margin of permitted space, a chicken egg hidden in a cloth. Such acts are practical, but they are also political in the broader sense. They reclaim nourishment from a system that calculates how little it can spare. Feeding yourself or someone weaker can be an act of love, and a small declaration that the master's ledger is not the only measure of need. Movement carries its own hidden possibilities. Paths through woods, marshes, riverbanks, and back roads are learned with attention. People know which route is quieter, where dogs are likely to be, which creek can cover tracks, which tree line leads toward another plantation, a town edge, a fishing place, or a meeting point. Geography becomes memory stored in the legs. A person may seem to be walking only from one task to another, while silently mapping routes of contact and escape. Information is precious. Who was sold? Which ship arrived? Which owner is in debt? Where a patrol was seen? Which house servant overheard an argument? Whether a neighbouring plantation changed overseers? News travels through conversation, labour exchange, market contact, dock work, kin visits, and pure careful listening. Enslaved people often know more about the emotional weather of a district than owners realise. Power likes to imagine itself mysterious. Servants in kitchens and yards usually hear enough to ruin that fantasy. One mainstream historical fact is essential here. Resistance among enslaved people in colonial America took many forms, from everyday non-cooperation to flight, self-defense, conspiracy, arson, poisoning, and revolt. Open rebellion was rarer than small daily acts, not because people accepted slavery, but because repression was severe and the costs were terrible. This matters because older narratives sometimes treat resistance as real only when it becomes dramatic. In truth, the daily struggle to hold back labour, preserve kin, and protect dignity was resistance too. The language people use with power can itself become a shield. A person may answer in ways that sound obedient while revealing little. Feigned confusion can buy time. Exaggerated politeness can hide contempt. Selective hearing can be remarkably useful when an unpleasant instruction is spoken from far enough away. There is an entire art to seeming harmless. It may not flatter modern heroic taste, but it keeps people alive. Children learn this art by watching adults. A boy sees when his mother answers plainly and when she answers vaguely. A girl notices that an older man nods before he speaks, giving himself a second to think. Young people study tone, posture, and the handling of dangerous questions. They also find their own methods. A child may play innocent while observing everything. Never underestimate the political potential of appearing small and forgettable. History has, but children rarely do. There are also more direct forms of defiance. Running away is one of the clearest. Some flee briefly to visit family, escape a beating, or force negotiation. Others try to disappear for longer periods, heading into woods, swamps, towns, Spanish Florida, native territory, or wherever rumour suggests a chance, however faint of freedom or less brutal conditions. The risks are enormous. Hunger, dogs, patrols, betrayal, injury, weather, and unfamiliar ground all threaten. Yet people still run. That fact alone tells you what remaining meant. The sensory world of escape is intense. Thorns scrape the legs, mud grips the feet, Mosquitoes gather without invitation. Branches snap too loudly in the dark. Night air feels cold against sweat. Every distant bark becomes a question. Moonlight helps and exposes at the same time. A person moving through the woods may hear the whole landscape as warning. Owl calls, rustling leaves, water over roots, breathing too fast, heart louder than reason. Freedom is not serene at first. It is usually exhausted, hungry, and listening hard. Some who flee form temporary hidden camps or take shelter among sympathetic networks. Others are captured quickly and punished severely. The archives record such flights in frustratingly blunt language, as if a human being's desperate run towards self-possession was simply an administrative inconvenience. Height, scars, clothing, accent, skills, complexion, all listed with the cold precision of property notices. And yet every notice announces something unintended. Someone refused, a more unsettling form of resistance, much feared by slaveholders, involved poisoning or attempted poisoning. The fear was real, sometimes rooted in actual events, sometimes swollen by planter paranoia. Enslaved cooks and healers had knowledge of plants, substances, and access that made masters uneasy. Historians still debate how widespread such acts truly were in the early 18th century, because accusations could be exaggerated, fabricated, or impossible to verify, but the fear itself matters. It reveals how vulnerable masters felt in the intimate spaces where they depended on the labour of those they oppressed. Arson, too, appears in the shadowy history of resistance. Fire threatens barns, crops, stored goods, houses, and entire fortunes. In a wooden colonial world full of dried leaf, lamp flame, and summer heat, fire is never a minor matter. Whether every suspicious blaze came from resistance is impossible to know, but owners often worried that their own wealth might become smoke. There is a dark symmetry in that. A system built on consuming lives always fears being consumed in return. Community protection is one of the most important quiet resistances. People hide one another's mistakes. They give warnings. They cover absences. They share remedies after punishment. They keep a child occupied so a mother can work and avoid trouble. They teach someone new to a plantation what the danger signs are. This may not look like rebellion in the theatrical sense, but it weakens isolation, and isolation is one of slavery's favourite tools. Mutual care can be subversive simply because it keeps people from breaking as neatly as the system intends. A quirky detail from the broader slaveholding world fits beautifully here. Some owners complained bitterly that enslaved people had a talent for pretending not to understand instructions at exactly the moments understanding would have benefited the owner most. Perhaps the order was badly phrased. Perhaps the timing was unfortunate. Perhaps colonial authority was not quite as dazzlingly clear as advertised. Selective incomprehension has a long and honourable history. Resistance also happens in the mind. You preserve a true judgment of the people above you, no matter what words you must say aloud. You notice their hypocrisies, vanities, fears, and incompetence. You laugh at them privately. You refuse to grant them moral greatness simply because they have power. This inward independence is difficult to document, but it matters enormously. Domination wants not only your labour, but your admiration. Denying that admiration, even silently, keeps a core part of the self uncolonized. Names matter here as well. A person called one thing by the owner may still be known differently among kin and friends. Nicknames, African names, family names, praise names, all can carry identity that refuses reduction. To answer publicly to one label while privately holding another is a small but meaningful split between imposed identity and chosen self. Slavery loves a single fixed category. Human beings have a habit of being multiple. There is also resistance in pleasure, dancing when you can, laughing hard at a sharp joke, dressing with care from poor materials, courting with style, telling stories that celebrate wit over rank, singing in a way that fills the chest after a draining day. Oppression prefers the oppressed to appear flattened, grateful, or broken. Joy can interfere with that picture, not because joy ignores suffering, but because it proves suffering has not achieved full possession. Some acts of resistance end badly. Many do. A failed escape, a betrayed plan, a hidden theft discovered, a spoken insult overheard, all can lead to whipping, confinement, sale, or worse. There is no honest way to tell this history without that truth. Courage under slavery is often punished with frightening efficiency. Still, punishment does not erase the act. It only proves the system felt threatened enough to respond. Open conspiracies and revolts, though less common than everyday resistance, remain part of the colonial landscape. Memories of uprisings in the wider Atlantic world circulate among both the enslaved and the enslavers. News of unrest in the Caribbean or elsewhere feeds fear, hope, rumour, and repression. Colonial authorities listen nervously for signs of organised revolt because they understand arithmetic. On many plantations and in some districts, the enslaved outnumber the enslavers. Control, for all its noise, often rests on a narrow ledge. So what does quiet defiance really look like in 1720? It looks like a woman saving seeds, a man keeping track of paths no owner taught him, a child learning which truths not to speak aloud, a cook passing food sideways, a labourer slowing his stroke just enough to keep some strength for himself, a family keeping private names alive, a worker hearing an insult and refusing, inwardly, to believe it. A runner vanishing into trees because one more day under the lash felt less bearable than the night ahead. This is resistance without costume, often without applause, and usually without witnesses who write sympathetically. Yet it is everywhere once you know how to look. The system claims total control because systems like that always boast. Daily life answers more quietly. Not total. Never total. There is still delay, concealment, humour, memory, cunning, care, and will. There is still the stubborn human habit of pushing back, even when pushing back must happen in whispers, in sideways glances, in hidden routes, and in choices so small that only another enslaved person might notice them. That does not make those choices minor. It makes them daily, and daily resistance is often what keeps a people alive. By 1720, your life is shaped not only by the people nearest to you, but by a much larger machine stretching far beyond the field. Cabin, kitchen, or workshop. Slavery is not some grim little side arrangement tucked behind the colonial house. It sits at the centre of trade, law, religion, politics, and polite society. If you follow the path of tobacco from a Chesapeake plantation, rice from the Carolina Low Country, indigo from a vat, or barrels from a dockside warehouse, you find the same truth waiting at every turn. The colonial world is built to look respectable on top and extractive underneath. You can feel that wider world most clearly at the port. A harbour in the early 18th century is never shy. Ships creak at anchor, ropes strain and slap, sailcloth snaps in the wind. Gulls complain overhead with their usual talent for sounding personally offended by commerce. Men shout measurements, curses, prices, and instructions. Casks roll over planks. Tar, fish, wet wood, molasses, salt air, sweat, and mud all mingle into one thick working smell. On the waterfront, the empire becomes physical. If you are an enslaved dock worker or labourer near such a place, you stand at a crossroads of goods and information. Tobacco leaves headed for Europe, sugar and rum arriving from the Caribbean, cloth, metal tools, ceramics, and imported luxuries moving inland. Letters, newspapers, and rumours crossing oceans. The port is where distant decisions become local realities. A price change in London can mean harder work in Virginia. A storm in the Atlantic can stall shipments and raise tempers. A war between crowns can alter shipping routes and military demands. Very grand men in wigs make decisions far away, and somehow your back is expected to feel the consequences. This is one of the most important facts about slavery in 1720. It is woven directly into the Atlantic economy. Colonial profits from staple crops depend heavily on enslaved labour, and merchants, ship owners, insurers, factors, and investors all benefit from the trade those crops sustain. Slavery is not only a plantation issue, it is a commercial system linking countryside and city, colony and empire, landowner and banker. Wealth travels in elegant forms. The labour that created it rarely does. In the Chesapeake, tobacco dominates. The crop shapes land use, labour systems, shipping schedules, and the fortunes of planters large and small. By 1720, tobacco has already made the region deeply dependent on transatlantic markets. Ships carry hogsheads of cured leaf outward, and with those shipments goes the work of countless enslaved hands. Tobacco may be wrapped, inspected, packed, and judged by merchants who will never smell the field mud where it began. Profit has a talent for forgetting its origins. In South Carolina, rice transforms the colony into one of the richest slave societies in mainland British North America. Rice exports bring enormous wealth to elite planters, especially in the Low Country, where enslaved African labour and expertise are central to cultivation. The polished grain reaching foreign markets looks clean and orderly. The labour behind it is wet, difficult, disease-ridden, and relentless. Markets adore elegant outcomes. They are less sentimental about how those outcomes are produced. Indigo adds another layer. Encouraged at various times by imperial demand and bounties, indigo joins rice as a valuable export in parts of the South. Elsewhere, enslaved labour supports livestock, naval stores, wheat, household production, artisan trades, and transport. Even colonies with smaller enslaved populations remain tied to slave-based economies through shipping, finance, consumption, and legal precedent. One colony may pride itself on moderation while happily importing goods produced by brutal labour somewhere else. Moral distance is one of the oldest colonial luxuries. Urban life does not stand apart from this system. Cities and towns rely on enslaved labour for loading ships, carting goods, building houses, cleaning streets, tending stables, cooking meals, nursing children, crafting goods, and sustaining daily commerce. In places like Charleston especially, slavery is visible everywhere. In northern ports too, enslaved labour plays a significant role. Even if later memory tries to sweep that fact politely under a carpet and hope nobody notices the shape underneath. Carpets, sadly for them, are not very good historians. Merchants are crucial here. They extend credit, arrange shipments, store goods, and connect planters to overseas markets. Credit networks can determine whether a plantation expands, whether debts mount, whether people are sold, and whether harvest pressure intensifies. If a planter owes money in London or Charleston, that debt may tighten every life on the estate. A child does not need to understand finance to suffer from it. A bad year, a delayed payment, an overextended owner, all can lead to harsher provisioning, more sales, or more aggressive labour demands. The legal world supports all of this with chilling efficiency. Colonial assemblies pass slave codes. Courts uphold property claims. Officials record sales, estates, debts, and inheritances that treat human beings as transferable assets. Sheriffs enforce judgments. Clerks enter names into ledgers. Lawyers argue over value. The courthouse may look calmer than the whipping yard, but it serves the same order. One produces pain in flesh, the other converts pain into paperwork. Churches are implicated too. Ministers preach to slave-holding congregations. Vestries and church wardens are often drawn from the same elite families profiting from bondage. Some clergy criticize cruelty in mild terms. Some encourage Christian instruction for the enslaved, and some speak more plainly in defense of hierarchy. But institutional religion, on the whole, adapts itself remarkably well to a society built on slavery. Sunday prayer can float upward from hands that signed bills of sale on Monday. The colonies are full of such impressive achievements in selective conscience. Polite society depends on slavery in quieter ways. A planter's table, well supplied and elegantly served, rests on enslaved cooking and agriculture. Clothing, furnishings, imported tea, sugar, and decorative items all circulate through a world sustained by coerced labour. A gentleman may discuss philosophy, while an enslaved servant stands behind his chair. A lady may receive guests in comfort, while a black nurse tends her child in the next room. Refinement often turns out to be brutality wearing cleaner linen. The military and political order are entangled with slavery as well. Colonial leaders worry about rebellion, foreign invasion, and alliances between enslaved people and outside enemies. In regions where black populations are large, white fears of revolt shape militia organization, patrol behavior, and public policy. The arithmetic of slavery influences governance constantly. Where many are held down by few, the few become nervous, and nervous rulers tend to pass more rules. One fascinating detail from the wider colonial world is how much information enslaved people could pick up simply by moving through these spaces. A dock worker hears sailors talk, a house servant overhears dinner conversation, a driver learns crop estimates. A skilled artisan notices who is in debt and who is buying more land. A town labourer catches fragments of war news, shipping delays, or political complaints. The wider world leaks through walls more often than masters like to imagine. Empires gossip constantly. The Atlantic slave trade itself still looms over 1720. Many black people in the mainland colonies are African-born, and ships continue to bring captives across the ocean through a brutal commercial system connecting African traders, European merchants, insurers, ship captains, colonial buyers, and port authorities. The Middle Passage remains one of the central horrors behind colonial society. Even people born in the colonies live in a world shaped by ongoing arrivals, changing demographics, languages newly heard, and trauma that has crossed an ocean. The colony is never just local. It is fed by forced migration. Historians continue to debate some regional details of demographic change, cultural formation, and the relative balance between imported labour and natural increase in different mainland colonies around 1720. The pace varies by place. South Carolina's ties to the Atlantic slave trade are especially strong. Chesapeake slavery develops along somewhat different demographic lines over time. Northern colonies show still other patterns, but across these differences one thing remains settled. Slavery is foundational, not incidental. You can see that foundation in the built environment. Warehouses line the waterfront. Roads connect plantations to inspection points and ports. Mills process grain, barns cure tobacco, rice fields are engineered with dikes, floodgates, and embankments. Townhouses rise from wealth generated by rural labour, church pews, court benches, counting houses, and merchant offices all form part of one larger system. Landscapes are arguments in wood, brick, mud, and water. They say who is expected to work and who is expected to profit. The world of paper matters almost as much as the world of land. Bills of lading, shipping manifests, estate inventories, debt notes, insurance papers, account books, wills, and legislative acts all help make slavery durable. A person can disappear into these documents as a number, a value, a unit of labour, a line item beside livestock or silver. It is easy to think of violence as loud, but some of the most durable violence is performed with neat handwriting. A quirky but revealing tidbit appears in colonial advertisements and notices. Planters and merchants could be astonishingly specific about the talents of enslaved people, when money was at stake. A man is listed as a good cooper. A woman is praised as an excellent cook. Another person is described as speaking more than one language or understanding stock. The same society that insists black people are naturally inferior becomes quite eager to advertise black intelligence whenever there is profit to be squeezed from it. Contradiction, apparently, is no obstacle when salesmanship is involved. Politics in the colonies cannot be separated from slavery either. Elite families gain influence through land and labour. Wealth from slave-based production helps shape who sits in assemblies, who lends money, who commands militia units, who serves as justice, and who marries into whom. Slavery is part of the architecture of power. Even debates that seem unrelated, taxes, trade regulation, imperial policy, land claims, often have slavery underneath them like beams beneath a floor. For enslaved people, living within this larger world means your daily reality is affected by distant forces you may only glimpse. A war between empires may increase labour demands or tighten local discipline. A boom in crop prices may mean expansion and harsher work. Debt may mean sale. New shipments from Africa may reshape language and kin possibilities. Merchant failures can ripple outward. A storm sinking ships can alter markets months later. You do not need direct access to a ledger to be ruled by one. Scholars still argue over how much agency different colonial institutions had in shaping slavery versus simply reflecting market forces, because the relationship between economy, law, and racial ideology is complex, but from the ground level of lived experience, the distinction can feel academic. Whether the blow comes from greed, law, or social custom, it lands on the same body. Institutions cooperate more often than they conflict. The wider colonial world also creates points of comparison. Enslaved people hear of Spanish Florida, native nations, Caribbean islands, distant towns, wars, sailors, pirates, missionaries, and rumours of better or worse conditions elsewhere. Most of these places remain far away, half known, or dangerously mythologized. But the knowledge that other arrangements exist can matter psychologically. It keeps the master's world from seeming like the only imaginable one. Tyranny prefers to look inevitable. Geography complicates that illusion. So when you widen the frame around black life in 1720, you do not leave the intimate world behind. You understand it better. The coarse shirt, the ration bowl, the harsh order, the family fear, the hidden song, the quiet defiance. All of it sits inside a network of ports, courts, churches, ledgers, ships, markets, and imperial ambitions. Slavery is the thread running through them. Not the only thread, but one of the strongest. That is what makes the colonial world so unsettling when viewed honestly. Its beauty, wealth, and confidence are not separate from bondage. They are entangled with it. The fine house depends on the muddy field. The merchant's ledger depends on the worker's hands. The polite sermon depends on a society willing to hear certain sufferings as normal background noise. And if you stand still long enough in 1720 listening to waves slap against the harbour, to carts rumble past warehouses, to church bells ring over a town built by coerced labour, you can hear the truth in all that motion. The colony is not merely tolerating slavery, it is thriving on it. At the centre of life in 1720 is a simple, painful truth. You are expected to endure what should be unendurable. Not once in a dramatic burst, but daily, hourly, in small and large ways that press on the body and mind until endurance itself becomes a kind of second skin. The system around you is built to make this seem ordinary. It wants hunger to feel normal, uncertainty to feel natural, separation to feel routine, and fear to feel like weather. Yet even in such a world, something stubborn remains. Human dignity does not vanish just because others deny it. It survives in quiet forms, often the ones least visible to power. You wake and sleep inside uncertainty. That alone changes a person. You do not know whether a parent will return at the end of the day in the same mood, health, or condition as when they left. You do not know whether an owner's debt, anger, whim, or ambition will alter your life without warning. You do not know whether a child will recover from fever, whether food will stretch, whether punishment will fall, whether the next season will tighten every demand. Uncertainty is not a passing discomfort. It is the air around every plan. In such a world, hope itself has to become practical. Hope, for many people, is not grand or theatrical. It is a hope measured in very specific things. That a baby survives the winter, that a mother heals after childbirth, that a tool does not break at the wrong moment, that a father's visit is allowed, that a garden patch yields enough greens, that someone recovers from a whipping without infection, that no trader arrives this month, that tonight there is enough food for every bowl. These hopes may sound small to people living with comfort, but under slavery, small hopes can be the architecture of emotional survival. Grief is just as constant. It has many causes, and not all of them are dramatic. Some grief comes from death, and death comes often enough. Illness, childbirth, overwork, exposure, poor diet, and inadequate care make mortality a familiar neighbour. Some grief comes from separation, sudden or threatened. Some comes from humiliation, from being spoken to as less than human, from seeing someone you love treated as property, from knowing your own tenderness has no protection in law. There is also grief for what cannot fully be named, the grief of stolen possibility, the life you might have lived if no one had claimed ownership of your future. This sorrow does not always appear as loud weeping. Sometimes it is a person staring into the fire a little too long. Sometimes it is silence at the edge of a gathering. Sometimes it is a song sung very softly. Sometimes it is a mother touching a sleeping child's face with a look that contains both love and fear. A great deal of grief in enslaved life must remain disciplined because daily labour does not pause to honour broken hearts. You carry sorrow while chopping, stirring, washing, hoeing, lifting, and walking. Grief becomes mobile, and yet people do not live only in grief. This matters deeply. There is pride here too, pride in surviving another hard season, pride in a clean swept floor or a well-patched shirt, pride in a child learning quickly, pride in a well-cooked pot, a strong fence, a healed wound, a skill mastered, a song remembered, a garden tended carefully enough to offer more than expected. A system can strip people of legal standing and still fail to erase their sense of excellence. That failure is one of its quiet defeats. There is also humour, sometimes remarkably dry humour. Humour about the weather, which is always too much of something. Humour about an owner's fussiness. Humour about a pig with better manners than certain white men. Humour about a bent hat, an overproud rooster, a pot that refuses to boil properly, or a child who asks too many questions at exactly the wrong moment. Laughter under oppression is not evidence that conditions are mild. It is evidence that people continue claiming mental space the system cannot fully occupy. One mainstream fact deserves clear attention here. Enslaved people in colonial America were never merely passive victims of the system. Even when the system inflicted enormous harm, they built families, worked with intelligence, preserved culture, resisted in many ways, nurtured children, judged the people above them, and developed moral worlds of their own. Recognizing this does not soften slavery. It helps tell the truth. A complete account includes both the violence of the institution and the active humanity of those forced to live within it. Emotional endurance often depends on rhythm. The rhythm of repeated tasks, the rhythm of songs, the rhythm of prayers, the rhythm of one day following another, even when those days are hard. Repetition can be oppressive, but it can also steady the mind. A child learns that evening brings certain voices, certain smells, certain routines. an adult learns that even after a terrible day, the body may still find comfort in washing, eating, talking, and lying down near familiar people. Rituals, however humble, help hold life together. Touch matters enormously in a world of deprivation. The warmth of a shared blanket, a hand guiding a child away from danger, fingers working carefully through tangled hair, a shoulder offered during grief, a baby sleeping against a chest, the cooling cloth placed on a fevered forehead. Touch can be controlling in slavery, but among loved ones it also becomes healing, protective, and reassuring. It says, without speech, that you remain part of a human circle. Memory protects the self too. A person remembers a parent's voice, a homeland across the ocean, a prayer, a planting technique, a recipe, a proverb, a burial custom, a way of braiding, a family joke, a name not written in any official book. Memory gives continuity where the system prefers fragmentation. It tells you that your life did not begin with the claim of an owner, and it will not be defined fully by that claim either. This is especially important for children born into slavery, whose entire visible world may seem shaped by bondage. Adults around them carry older stories, and those stories widen the horizon of identity. Children themselves embody one of slavery's deepest contradictions. They are vulnerable, dependent, playful, curious, and full of future, all the ordinary qualities of childhood. Yet the society around them looks at many of them and sees future labour, future profit, future reproduction of property. Against that cold calculation stands the community's own view. A child is fussed over, corrected, teased, cherished, worried about, and taught. The difference between those two views is the difference between possession and love. Some people find dignity in mastery of a labour itself, though the labour is forced. A cooper who shapes a barrel well, a cook who balances flavour from poor ingredients, a woman who keeps children clean despite limited resources, a field worker who understands soil and weather, a healer who knows which herb might calm a stomach. Each can take satisfaction in competence. This is not satisfaction in slavery. It is satisfaction in the self that slavery cannot entirely flatten. Skill becomes one way of proving inward worth to oneself and to others. A quirky but revealing tidbit from slaveholding societies is how often owners mistook endurance for contentment. If people kept working, if they laughed occasionally, if they maintained households, if they sang, some whites took this as evidence that slavery was tolerable or even beneficial. It is one of history's most embarrassing acts of self-deception. The captive person's ability to survive becomes, in the oppressor's mind, proof that the cage is reasonable. Human beings can be alarmingly inventive when excusing comfort built on other people's pain. Love keeps returning, even here. Not sentimental love detached from hardship, but a durable sort. A mother saving the better portion for a child. A father teaching caution without crushing spirit. Friends making room by the fire. Elders correcting the young because they want them to live. Partners holding on to one another emotionally even when the law does not recognize their bond. Love in such circumstances is rarely decorative. It is muscular. It works. Fear works too. Of course, it remains present at the edges of everything. Fear of punishment, fear of sale, fear of sickness, fear of bad harvests, harsh winters, suspicious questions, accidents, betrayals, and the mood of those with power. Emotional life under slavery is not peaceful in any modern sense. The nervous system is asked to adapt to prolonged threat. A sudden hoofbeat can tighten every muscle. A shouted name can chill the stomach. A stranger arriving in the yard can make conversation stop. This is what it means to live where your fate may turn on someone else's impulse. Still, people make meaning out of survival itself, to continue, to raise children, to bury the dead with care, to sing, to laugh, to tend a garden, to remember names, to preserve a private judgment of justice and injustice. All this asserts a truth the system denies. You are not an object simply because a ledger says so. You are not a beast because a law claims it. You are not empty because power tries to use you. Dignity under slavery often appears not as public declaration, but as daily refusal to agree inwardly with degradation. Historians still debate how enslaved people in particular regions and decades understood ideas like freedom, kinship, ethnicity, and belonging in their own terms, because the sources are incomplete and often filtered through hostile observers. Some scholars emphasize continuity with African identities, others the rapid formation of new Creole cultures, and many stress both at once in varying combinations. That uncertainty matters because it reminds you that real lives exceed the categories later historians can neatly assign. People knew themselves in ways archives only partly preserve. Endurance is never infinite. Some people break under strain. Some fall ill. Some die young. Some become withdrawn. Some risk everything because the burden grows too heavy. To say that people endured is not to say they were untouched. The costs were profound. Bodies wore down. Relationships were wounded by coercion. Grief accumulated. Childhoods narrowed. Futures were stolen. Honesty requires keeping all of that in view. But honesty also requires something else. It requires seeing that even inside this machinery of domination, human beings continue to create meaning that the machinery did not authorize. A family meal, however thin, could still be an expression of care. A joke could still reveal intelligence. A prayer could still carry conviction. A skill could still command respect. A child could still be taught wonder alongside caution. An elder could still pass on memory. These things do not defeat slavery by themselves. They keep the soul from dissolving within it. As evening settles, you can almost feel the emotional weight of the day changing shape. The labour is not gone from the body, but it loosens enough for reflection to return. The smell of smoke rises. The sounds of night gather beyond the cabin walls. Someone speaks softly. Someone leans against someone else. Someone stares into the coals. Tiredness fills the limbs, but the mind still moves, sorting the day into hurt, relief, gratitude, fear, and endurance. This quiet sorting may be one of the most human acts of all, and what finally emerges from such a life is not a lesson in obedience, despite what the slave society wants. It is a lesson in persistence, not perfect, not easy, not cleanly noble every hour, but real persistence. People endure what should never have been demanded of them, and in enduring they leave evidence of something larger than suffering. They leave evidence of humanity under pressure, of dignity surviving insult, of hope narrowed but not extinguished, of love continuing its work in cramped rooms and open fields alike. Now the night deepens. The harsher edges of the day begin to soften in the dark, not because they are forgotten, but because the body can no longer carry them at full volume. Firelight lowers itself into embers. The air cools along the walls. Voices drift into murmurs, then into pauses, then into the slower breathing of people settling where they can. Outside, the insects continue their patient music. A distant animal calls once and then is still. The earth holds its damp smell. Smoke lingers in cloth, in hair, in timber. You let the room become quieter. The roughness is still there, but it recedes a little. A blanket, however thin, gathers warmth. A familiar presence nearby eases the mind. The day's commands no longer reach quite so sharply across the dark. Thought loosens. The body, worn by labour and feeling, begins at last to release its grip. Even sorrow becomes softer at this hour, less like a blow and more like a tide moving away from shore. In this fading hush, what remains is the simplest truth. People lived here. They feared, loved, hoped, mourned, joked, remembered, and endured here. They were never only what the system called them. They were more, always more, even when the world around them insisted on less. And as the night air cools and the last ember dims, that quiet human truth is the one you carry with you into sleep, gentle, steady, and still alive.